Hi, I'm Shelby Williams, the Plano City Council and also Collin County Republican Party Chair. Tonight, of course, I'm talking about the City Council meeting in Plano. So we had 3 zoning cases tonight, and the first one was there was some misunderstanding about this. The first one was to modify a planned development district to change some of the details and the development standards, primarily related to parking and setback. Now, this was already zoned for multifamily. Multifamily was already permitted here. There were 3 different zoning areas where multifamily was permitted. They are respectively already built, in the process of being built, and not yet built, but they are approved. So I want to make it clear that this vote did not permit any additional multifamily that was not already allowed. It changed some of the planned development standards, again, mainly with respect to setback and parking, prior to the commencement of the build out of the multifamily there. Again, no additional multifamily approved, nor requested. There was one provision that was a stipulation that was made by the Planning and Zoning Commission to require posted notification for air filters of the manufacturer's standards and recommended standards and replacement criteria for the air filters, and with a log of when they were changed next to each air filter. And I felt that was had the risk of setting a precedent, a problematic precedent, where we are actually required to, or not required, but we are requiring applicants to post this kind of thing, and delving into a level of regulation and regulatory oversight that I feel is inappropriate and for the city. So we actually undid that P&Z stipulation and then passed it as it was originally presented to Planning and Zoning without that stipulation. So with that amendment, that passed 8-0. The next was for a SUP, specific use permit, for a privately owned electrical substation. So an SUP is something that is allowed under the current zoning, but needs that extra layer of approval. So it's something that is a permissible use. It doesn't require rezoning. It just requires the request to come before City Council and Planning and Zoning by extension to say, yes, you can also do this very specific thing that requires us to take an additional look at it. So that was for a private electrical substation to service the electrical needs for a data center. Now, you will note maybe that we did not actually approve a small modular nuclear reactor to power this data center, which is actually happening. Not in Plano, not in Texas, but small modular reactors, SMRs, are just starting to be used. These aren't like full-blown nuclear power plants. These are, as the name suggests, small modular reactors, but they are nuclear reactors. They're the kinds of reactors that power subs and aircraft carriers. They are now being deployed to actually power data centers, which I think is pretty cool. So that SUP was approved 9-0. And the third zoning case was for an SUP for not a small modular reactor nor even an electrical substation, but for a trade school for massage therapy. So this is on just one of our typical retail spaces, and it's going to be a trade school to train and license massage therapists. So that SUP passed 8-0. We then had 2 items on the agenda to nominate members to the Collin Central Appraisal District Board of Directors and the Denton Central Appraisal District Board of Directors. Now, the way this whole thing works is we as the city at this point in the game can nominate people who will be at this point just nominees. Now, this is for the entire county's Central Appraisal District Board of Directors. So all of the candidates get put on a ballot, basically. And every local taxing authority, that's a city, a school district, and the county, gets a certain number of votes based on their property tax revenue. So the city of Plano, despite being the largest city in Collin County, we have a minuscule number of votes compared to these school districts, because school districts in Texas get a lot more property tax dollars than cities. So we nominated, I should say renominated, because he currently serves former Councilman Rick Grady to this. Now, the way this is going to work is all those nominees are going to come back to us in December, and they're going to go to all the taxing authorities, the school districts, the cities, and the county, so that we can actually divvy up our votes. Now, if there are 12 applicants on the list, we can actually apportion our applicants or our votes equally amongst all the applicants. We can give all of our votes to a single applicant. We can mix and match however we want. That's how that process works. But again, our number of votes are minuscule compared to the school district's votes. And it's not just the Plano Independent School District. It's Frisco ISD, Allen, Lovejoy, etc., all across the county, Wiley ISD, etc. So those all get pooled together, and the people with the most votes win. In Denton County, so the sliver, the furthest westernmost sliver of Plano is in Denton County. We get comparatively almost no votes there because we're just a tiny portion of that county. But we'll still get our votes and we'll still cast them, but we did not nominate anybody tonight. So that is tonight's meeting. Now, I know people have been waiting very, very patiently for my recap of the budget and the tax rate. I'm going to ask you to wait just a little bit longer. Please exercise a little more patience. This was a really, I'll give you a slight recap right now, but this was a very complicated and convoluted tax year. And I'll cover a couple of the highlights right now, but what I'm actually doing is I'm developing a slide deck, and I'm going to make a recording of the slides to help better explain what's going on, because I'm about to throw some numbers out at you, and without the charts and everything, it's not going to make as much sense. So I'm going to record me going through the slide deck with a little circle in the bottom right corner of my mug, talking about all this. And then I'll publish that. So what happened is, I mean, we, the city of Plano, adopted the no new revenue tax rate 4 years in a row, starting in late 2019, this time 5 years ago. And what the no new revenue rate means, at the time it was called the effective tax rate, but what that means is we're not collecting any additional tax dollars this year than we did last year on properties that were taxed in both years. So that doesn't include new properties to be built and come online, which also have to pay property tax. So the no new revenue rate means we're not collecting any additional tax dollars. That's irrespective of the rate. The no new revenue rate means we set the rate to whatever rate means we don't collect any new dollars. And that's invariably a lower rate than we had the prior year, so that we're not collecting any new dollars. A lot of games are played, word games are played with the tax rate. That's not what's happening here. This year, we left our rate alone. We just left our tax rate the same as it was last year. Now, this does mean that was a tax increase. Now, I'll say that it is proper and necessary for government to increase the number of dollars it raises year over year to keep pace with inflation. We're subject to inflation just like you are. As a homeowner, a consumer, a business owner, anybody else. Everybody's got to contend with inflation. Governments are no exception. And all that construction you might have noticed on Parker Road, the costs for that have increased as well. We're also doing a lot of water and sewer line replacements. Cost went up for everything. So I did a chart. This is why I want to do the proper video with all the charts and slides and everything. I showed this at the council meeting. It didn't display very well. For the past 4 years, since Q1 of 2020, I charted the increase in CPI inflation. That's, a basket of groceries and energy, the same thing consumers have to pay. It showed increase in wages. That's national. I wasn't able to delve into the numbers just for the DFW area, but it's national increase in wages over time. I showed the costs to the city, that is population increase, because we're largely people driven. Our expenses are largely driven by population. So the measure of our cost increases to the city is population increase, which these days is very small in Plano. We're already built out, plus MCI, that's Municipal Cost Index. That's the inflationary measure for municipalities. That is not a basket of groceries. That's things like concrete, which you don't just generally pick up at the H-E-B or the Kroger. So I also charted the growth of the city budget over those 4 years since Q1 2020. And I only did it through Q1 of 2024, which was, back at the beginning of this year, because that's the latest that I was able to get wage data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So I can show the rest of the budget growth and everything, which I will. But I also showed the actual tax burden, the average tax burden. So something that's really super duper important to bear in mind. Taxes, property taxes, are not just applied to single family homeowners. We have one tax rate. Well, it's actually two tax rate, but it's not divided by property. There's the maintenance and operations, or M&O tax rate, and then there's the INS, interest and sinking tax rate, which really just means the debt. All the bonds that are approved, that goes under the debt, and that's a separate tax rate because you, the taxpayers, have already had a say on it. You've already gotten to vote on it. The M&O tax rate is what we're really talking about here. And like we said earlier, when you leave the tax rate alone, but property values go up, that means taxes go up. Now that's important and it's necessary over time. We adopted the no new revenue rate 4 years in a row. I only intended at the outset to do it 2 years in a row because we had some massive tax increases the few years prior. But then we hit 2020 and then we hit the inflationary period of 2021, 2022. So we kept our foot on the brake. We continued to adopt the no new revenue rate because our people were getting hit pretty hard. We effectively absorbed the cost for that. So one of the things you'll see in my chart is that the costs to the city have increased faster than our budget, more than our actual budget. So that literally means we are doing more with less. And the budget exceeded the taxes, the increase in taxes, because again, we're keeping taxes flat, but we're having to spend more over the years. So we had to tighten our belts, obviously. And I am going to skip to belt tightening at the end of this, and I'm going to delve more into it in my full recap. But so you're getting a lot more than you bargained for with this recap. I've already spent more time talking about the tax rate. But the property tax calculation and the tax rate is applied to all properties, single family, commercial, multifamily, everything. We cannot set one tax rate for single family homes, a separate tax rate for multifamily, and another tax rate for businesses. So it's just one tax rate, that's law, one tax rate applied to all properties. So every year on council, when we go through the budget and the tax rate process, we're shown a few things, and I'll show this as well in the slide deck. I've already got it in there. We're shown the average single family home market value. We're shown the average taxable value, which is really just the average market value with a homestead exemption applied, which isn't the actual taxable value. I'll get into that later. And it shows what the no new revenue rate would be and what the voter approval rate would be. So the state legislature passed some property tax reform in 2019, Senate Bill 2 and House Bill 3. So for cities, we cannot raise the actual level of taxes, like the actual dollar increase on properties taxed in both years, more than 3.5%. I'm very proud that I was part of the effort to champion that reform. And that's down from 8% set back in 1981. So 3.5%. We see these two numbers, what the no new revenue rate would be, the rate to not collect any additional dollars on properties taxed both years, the voter approval rate to not go above the 3.5% actual tax increase, as well as the tax impact to homeowners. Now, all 4 years that we adopted the no new revenue rate, this is homesteaded homeowners. This is people who actually live in your home, which are the only people, the only property owners that get any property tax protections under state law, with a very minor exception that doesn't even apply this year. That's to multifamily and rental property. It doesn't even apply this year. So all 4 years that we adopted the no new revenue rate, we saw that the tax impact to the average single family homesteaded homeowner, again, artificial taxable value average, was flat. which is what we expected it to be because we were keeping property taxes flat. So we was like, okay, that looks like what we expected, and we move along. This year, and we did have the first tax increase in 5 years last year, kept it flat 4 years. Last year we had the tax increase, and we saw a relatively nominal tax increase to the average single-family homeowner, homesteaded homeowner. And that was as we expected. This year, things were off a little for a variety of reasons, which I'll delve more into in my full recap. But with the no new revenue rate, meaning we're just keeping taxes flat, period. End of story. Just no new revenue this year. Read my lips, no new taxes. The average homesteaded single-family homeowner under the no new revenue rate, no new taxes, would still have had a 6.5% property tax increase. Now that seems bonkers, and that's what started me scratching my head, like, how can this be? What's wrong here? What's wrong with this picture? And so you may have heard this is the biggest tax increase in Plano's in 20 years in Plano. That is true only for a subset of property owners. It is the average single-family homesteaded homeowner who has lived in their home for probably more than 5 years. I'm shooting from the hip there, due to a confluence of reasons. Now, part of the reason for this is because the market value of single-family homes went up, average market value. This is all single-family homes in Plano. Went up, if I recall correctly, it was 7.6%. But the market value of the average multifamily complex went up only 2.3%. So single-family homes increased in value a lot more than multifamily, and even a fair bit more than commercial. So that means if you're looking at a baseline, whether it's the no new revenue rate or the voter approval rate, which we did adopt a tax rate within the voter approval rate. If we're looking at this baseline, it's applied across all properties. So if single-family homes went up this much, then single-family and multifamily went up this much, and commercial this much. Single-family homes are bearing a disproportionate share of the tax increase. That's exacerbated by the fact that 37% of our single-family homes now have the over 65 freeze. That is, in the year you turn 65, you can apply for a freeze to just have your taxes frozen at that level. No matter what your property value does, no matter what we do with the tax rate, you are never going to have to pay more than that level. So let's say you got your taxes frozen back in 1990, and now 34 years later, you're about 99 years old. But hey, if your taxes were $500 a year back in 1990, then they're still only $500 a year, your city portion of taxes. That's not to say anything in the school district. That's a totally separate taxing entity. So 37% of our homes now have that tax freeze. So again, government subject to inflation, when we have to increase the amount of dollars we collect to account for inflation, then when 37% of an already heavily impacted, this year heavily impacted single-family homeowner subset are not subject to an increase because they have the over 65 freeze, then that means those who don't have the freeze are also taking a disproportionate share of the tax increase, which is further exacerbated by the fact that under Texas state law, your taxable value is capped at a 10% increase every year. So to make the math simple, if you have a $500,000 home, market value and taxable value, like you just moved into it, market value and taxable value are $500,000. If your home value doubles to $1 million in the next year, under state law, your taxable value can still not increase more than $50,000. That's 10% of the starting $500,000 point. So you're going to get that 10% jump. Now, let's say the following year, nothing happens with your market value. It stays flat at $1 million. Heck, for fun, let's say it comes down a little to $900,000. So your market value just decreased by 10%. Your taxable value is still going to increase by 10% until the taxable value, which is now $550,000, catches up to whatever the market value is in that year when it finally catches up. So even though single family home values went up, again, if I recall right, 7.6%, the real, primarily average taxable value of a single family home actually went up 10%, because market values have been going so crazy in the past several years that most taxable values still have a ways to catch up, and they're just going to ratchet up 10% every year until they achieve equilibrium with the market rate. So that means that while multifamily got a 2.3% increase and commercial got a 6.1%, single family homes got a 10% increase. Rough, shooting from the hip, that's rough. And then of course, 37% of those didn't pay any new taxes because they had the senior tax freeze. So the remainder got the lion's share of that. So they got hit, again, I'm shooting from the hip here, they got hit with a roughly 12, 13% tax increase. So yes, that is a large tax increase on the average homesteaded single family homeowner. It has kept pace with wages. Now you yourself, your wages may not have kept pace with that, but writ large, and again, this is the national wage level, wages have caught up with those tax increases. And the costs to the city, we're not collecting any more tax than the additional costs we have incurred. We are continuing to do more with less. And we must continue to do so. So part of this, part of where we're looking beyond here is how much are we actually spending on the individual projects within the city of Plano? You may have heard about the chicken coop recently, where the city purported to lay out $61,700, maybe $62,700 for a chicken coop at the Plano Animal Shelter. Because when we passed the backyard hens ordinance a couple of years back, we had to have plans to put a chicken coop in there to keep any rescued chickens. Right now, we have chickens just kept in dog and cat kennels, but we had plans to put a chicken coop in there. $62,700. Now, with most things that pass in front of us, they're for things like concrete, asphalt, water line repair, some technology things, which I am actually equipped to look at that and say, yes, that's reasonable or not. Things like a mile of new water line, I'm not equipped to question the actual dollar value on that. I do look and see on every agenda item to see what's purported to be spent, why, etc. But I'm not equipped to challenge the dollar amount for a mile of water line replacement. But I think most of us, for a chicken coop, can scratch our heads and say, I'm guessing that's not right. So it does call into question where we can and should look at the individual expenses, the things we are spending money on may be right and necessary, but how much we're spending on them, that's a different matter. And that's something we have to take a very close look at over the coming fiscal year. Fiscal year starts October 1st. And by the next budget cycle, we have to be prepared to answer that, especially with, I'll just call it strange budgetary conditions that have produced a 6.5% tax increase if we didn't raise taxes at all. I mean, that's completely counterintuitive. So these are some of the things we have to look at to make sure that we are continually driving value. I will say this last thing regarding the tax rate. I said it's proper and necessary for government to raise more dollars over time. Typically, so the state and local government, state and federal government, my bad. State and federal governments, they increase the tax revenue they receive every year. They just don't have to vote on it. At the state level, the primary funding source is sales tax. Most parts of Texas, you get 8.25% sales tax. 6.25% of that is the state's. Municipalities, cities, have the option of an additional 2%. Regular viewers of this recap will know that half of our 2 cents goes straight to DART by virtue of being a DART member city. We don't get a choice about that. That was opted into way back in the 80s, and we're stuck with that for the time being, but we're championing, I'm actively championing DART modernization and reform. So stay on the lookout for that. But I digress. State government raises more tax dollars every year because spending by consumers increases every year, and hence more sales tax dollars are collected. The 8.25% rate, or the state's 6.25%, still holds. But if you buy $100 worth of stuff this year, then the state's going to collect $6.25, 6.25 cents. But if you spend $110 next year, then the state's going to collect an additional, 62.5 cents on that $10 increment. And they didn't have to vote on it. That's baked into the sales tax rate. Same with the federal government and the income tax. As wages go up over time, again, part of the inflationary pressure, as wages go up over time, if you earn $50,000 this year, and let's make the math easier, if you earn $100,000 this year and you have a 10% income tax rate, good luck with that, yeah, if only, I digress again, then you're going to pay $10,000 in income taxes. But if you get a raise and you're earning $110,000 next year, then you're going to pay $11,000 in income tax if your tax rate stays the same. But Congress didn't have to vote on that. That's baked into the tax rate. And as wages go up over time, the spending goes up over time, the amount of money the federal government collects via income taxes and the state government collects via sales taxes increases. They don't have to vote on it. We, as local government, do have to vote on it every year vis-a-vis the property tax rate. You feel it because it's property taxes. If you're spending more, you expect to pay more dollars, not a higher rate with sales tax. But if you hear there's a tax increase by the federal government, then you expect a higher income tax percentage. That's what a tax increase means in that context. In the context of municipal government or Texas local property tax government, we're funded primarily by property tax, then a tax increase literally means collecting more dollars this year. So we left the rate alone. And I'm not going to try to snow you and say we didn't increase taxes just because we left the rate alone, because if you watch this or you watch my Property Tax 101, you know that the rate is meaningless by itself. So that means an actual tax increase. But again, tax increases over time are proper. The question is, how much are they being increased? Is it the amount that's necessary to continue to provide services and keep pace with inflation, or is it excessive? That's what really matters. But because it's a property tax rate, we have to take that vote every year, no matter what we do with the tax rate. If we don't take a vote, we are assuming to pass the no new revenue rate, which would be the 5th time in 6 years, if we had done that this time. And again, that's not sustainable over time. It could be a good thing for several years in a row, but it is not possible in perpetuity, especially if you're no longer growing. Like Collin County is still growing. So the county of Collin, not individual cities or school districts inside of it, is still growing precipitously. So as new population and new developments are added, they pay property tax too. And as you gain economies of scale, then you shouldn't need to increase taxes necessarily all along the lines of inflation, maybe a little less. But I digress a third time. But in Plano, we're built out. We're adding very little property year over year compared to high growth areas. So you feel it because it's property taxes, because the value of your property has jack to do with your ability to pay your taxes or with the cost of city services or how much you spend other than your property tax bill. So it's felt a lot more keenly, and yeah, I don't blame folks for being upset about it, but it's very nuanced. The Texas property tax system is very convoluted, and all of this is one of the many reasons that I think property tax in Texas should be eliminated altogether. But see a different podcast of mine or a different recording of mine for that explanation. You can actually find that on my blog. Just look for elimination of property taxes. Search for that. So thank you for listening to this. I think 3/4 or more of this was just talking about the tax rate. I will go into more detail on that with the whole slideshow and everything. So thank you for your patience. I hope this explanation without the charts and slides still helps explain some things. So I'm Shelby Williams with Plano City Council and Collin County Republican Party Chair. Thank you for making it this far. I'll see you next time. God bless.